our July edition of Ask an Advocate. I'm Michael Waterloo, Communication Specialist here at PCADV, and I'm joined by Julie Bancroft, our Chief Public Affairs Officer, to host this month's session. This month, we're going to be talking about the link between domestic violence and animal abuse, and we have a wonderful panel joining us today. We have Amy Konis, the Executive Director at Harrisburg Area Humane Society, Grace Coleman, the Executive Director of Crisis Center North, as well as Dana Friday, the Pause for Empowerment Coordinator and Legal Advocate at Crisis Center North. And yes, your eyes are not deceiving you. We also have a couple of the animal advocates themselves from Crisis Center North. And as you hang out with us throughout the session, you're going to get to see them even more closely and sit here everything that they do, all the great work that the animals do, that our panelists do, and we're just really excited to have you join us today. Just want to remind you, as we have this on Facebook, please feel free to leave any comments, any questions that you have for any of our panelists, any of our hosts, and we will make sure to get to them. We'll ask the dogs if they can ask the question, answer the questions, but we'll kind of take that as they come. So just want to thank everybody for joining us, and we're going to get this kicked off.
Thanks, Mike, and thank you all for being here. So let's dive right in. We know that there is a distinct link between domestic violence and animal abuse. And fortunately, here in Pennsylvania, there's a coalition working together to address this. Amy, could you tell us a little more about the Keystone Link?
Absolutely. So the Keystone Link is a subset, if you will, of a broader national concept. It's coming from the National Link Coalition. So the National Link Coalition works on developing and broadening and educating folks on the concept of the link between human violence and animal violence. Amid COVID, a group of us got together from a number of different genres, if you will. Grace, of course, working in the domestic violence space. We also have Kathleen Palm, who works in the child abuse space. We have a Pennsylvania State Trooper liaison. We have a pediatrician. We have other animal advocates from the Animal Welfare Institute, the Humane Society of the United States. So I think what makes the Keystone Link Coalition so special, so unique, and has the potential to be so effective is we have professionals within all spaces really coming together and working in a collaborative fashion to talk about what we can do to educate Pennsylvanians and others working within these spaces about the link, the importance of the link, and to be kind of just really our initial goal is to start the dialogue. How can we more effectively work together to protect these victims or potential victims from this kind of violence?
Great, thank you. Yeah, it's really great to hear that the link is so multidisciplinary, because we know these topics are so nuanced. And so it's great that all of these perspectives are coming to the table to explore and try to educate and raise awareness. Grace, on that note, could you tell us a little bit about some of the common tactics or how common it is for abusive partners that abuse their partner? How often do we see them also abusing animals or family pets?
It's a really great question. There was a study done in 2017 that had surveyed survivors of domestic violence and asked them if they were in an abusive relationship, and if so, did they have a companion animal? And of those that had a companion animal, 89% of those victims reported that their animals were threatened, harmed, or killed by an abusive partner. And when you couple that with the statistic that 70% of US households have at least one pet, clearly perpetrators can utilize pets as a means of coercive control.
Great, thanks for sharing that. Those are some really staggering statistics. So you mentioned coercive control, And we know that's something we talk about very commonly with domestic violence. Can you talk a little bit more about how pets are used as part of coercive control over another, and what that specifically might look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the Pause for Empowerment team that consists of Dana and Sherry at our center, we've seen multiple times where perhaps a perpetrator would stop a victim from accessing a veterinarian, right? Or their ability to spend money on pet food. It could be that a perpetrator would threaten to harm, kill, or sometimes even get rid of a pet. We've seen situations where perpetrators refuse to allow a pet to go outdoors, or perhaps maybe the exact opposite, where leaving doors open and allowing the pet to escape would increase the overall danger to a pet. Things like providing vital care, right? It's like regular feeding, having the pet be able to go out and utilize the toilet on a regular basis, right? And considering the fact that in some situations, perpetrators will even use the potential harm to a pet against a victim, such as, if I harm this, dog, this cat, this bunny, whatever it is that the victim has, you're going to be accused of it. They're going to feel you abused the pet if you take it in for veterinary care, and they're going to take the pet away from you.
Thank you for sharing that. It's really, I think what you just shared underlines how complex domestic violence is, and really reinforces that just how nuanced coercive control can be, and how many tactics can be an abuser can use to control a partner. I think there's a misconception often that that domestic violence is only physical, but what you just explained is just another layer that can be used against a victim. And I think those are things that people don't often think about. So I really appreciate you sharing those tactics with us, so that we can be aware of what happens. Along those lines, Amy, could you talk to us a little bit about why social services professionals should pay attention to animal abuse, and why that's important?
Absolutely. I think that there are a number of headlines, frankly, that are local, that really illustrate the fact that animal abuse so many times is noted, mentioned, or a precursor to other forms of abuse, whether it is child abuse, elder abuse, or domestic violence. But from a national standpoint, animal abuse was brought up in the history of both the Uvalde and the Buffalo suspected shooters. That's real world. That is very, very current. If you take a look at those cases, both of those accusers had animal abuse in their history, and animal abuse at a young age is a warning sign and a signal of later violence. It is frequently connected to other forms of intimate partner violence. So the thought process is that if we can intervene at that level, maybe we can stop people from being hurt. If we can get there and get that pattern and that cycle stopped. The other thing that makes Pennsylvania very unique, that I think a lot of social service professionals don't recognize or realize, is we, as an animal welfare organization, if you are a humane society or a society for the prevention of cruelty of animals, an SPCA, you may hire and train what are called humane police officers. And those are the police officers that go out and investigate animal cruelty, in addition to a municipal officer or a state trooper. What makes us very, very unique, though, is our officers are able to enforce an area of the Crimes Code under Title 18, Section 5533, related to animal cruelty and only animal cruelty. But we have the power to get a search warrant. We can search a home. We can remove evidence, and we can certainly be affiants. And in some instances, we have better access to a home than a social service representative may. So it's another reason why we ask folks to keep their eyes open, because if you, for whatever reason, cannot get in the home or, can't get deep into the home, sometimes we can when you can't. And it's weird, it's odd, because we are private 501c3s, but we do have the ability to enforce a section of the crimes code that does involve search warrant, seizure, arrest, et cetera, et cetera. So it's another opportunity to work collaboratively together with another set of eyes.
Thank you.
There are a lot of aspects and a lot of barriers whenever somebody wants to leave an abusive relationship that don't really come up a lot. You hear, why don't they just leave? And we know what we've talked about it time and time again. It's not just that easy. The time that you go to leave is often the most dangerous time for a survivor to leave the relationship. And since we're talking about pets here, there's also that in the back of the mind of the survivors that I love my animal. I want to keep my animal safe. So Grace, when a survivor is leaving an abusive relationship, what are some steps that they're able to take in order to keep their pet safe?
This one I'm pretty passionate about, Michael, because my father was a veterinarian in northeastern Pennsylvania. And so probably a lot of this project started from seeing domestic abuse victims, right, within his practice, because actually they're much more likely to come and talk to the veterinarian than they were anyone else. And so, some of the things I've seen that would be helpful when a victim is leaving is you want to, obtain safe shelter for your pet, right? You not only have to think about that for yourself, but you have to think about that for your animal. And there's a wonderful organization, the Animal Welfare Institute, that also participates on the Keystone Link with Amy and I, that has a project called Safe Haven for Pets. And it's online, and it's certainly a tool that other domestic violence programs could use to share with victims in order to see where the closest, structures may be that could assist. And they're all somewhat different, right? They could be, a domestic violence center has built some kennels within its own parameters, or it could be something closer to the project that Dana and I are working on, where we provide actual housing for companion animals and their pets, right? So there's a variety of options available for victims. Packing a bag, right? That bag should include food, it should include medicine, it should include most of all your documents of ownership, right? The receipts that you may have from adoption or the purchase of pets, a license that would establish ownership, receipts from any animal purchases you've made, like anything that you can document that the pet is your own. Healthcare documents, vaccine records, a leash, right? ID tags, rabies tags, carrier, toys, bedding. I could probably go on. Essentially, if everybody's animals are like mine, and I'm assuming they are, given how Americans are crazy about their pets, right? They probably even have their own luggage. I know mine do, right? And they are packed and ready to go when we need to head out the door. And of course, I don't mean to make light of a domestic abuse situation. That planning would be much more serious and intensive, but it's really important to think ahead, so there's not additional stress when the victim actually does take that step.
Thank you for those. I appreciate you going over those steps and kind of that safety planning, especially whenever it's coming to finding shelter afterward. So whenever that comes to programs, Grace, what are the programs able to do to evaluate their own readiness to be prepared to help survivors who do have pets?
Yeah, I think readiness is individual to each program, right? So if you're going to evaluate your program, I think the best thing to do is to do the same kind of things we would do with the people we serve, right? Look at the strengths of your program, focus on a strength-based perspective, right? You have to look at the capacity that your organization has. And I know that's a really touchy subject for all of us out there right now during COVID, as we're stretched really thin, right? But it's important to make sure that if you're going to take on a new initiative, that you can do it, and that you can do it well, and you can do it responsibly. And you can look for potential partners. They are everywhere. Lots of people want to support, these kinds of initiatives for local domestic violence centers. So my motto is always to start with small steps, but take the steps, because small steps lead to great journeys, right? And what you want to do is build a solid foundation in your program that you can build upon over time. Our Pause for Empowerment program began in 2011. It took a very long time for us to get where we are, but we took it step by step, and we did what we could do. When we started this project for housing at the center through OVC, our program was awarded one of 5 grants in the country to establish housing for companion animals and their pets. One of the things that Dana and I took to the team, right, was if I could tell you that there was one thing we could do as a domestic violence program, just one thing that would remove 50% of the obstacles for all domestic violence victims that we serve, would you say yes? And they're like, of course we would say yes. And that step is looking at companion animals and the intersection they play in domestic violence. So I would encourage other programs to begin.
Thank you for that. And Amy, I'm going to go over to you with this one here. Talking about from a community level, how can programs partner with their local communities to be better prepared to help the survivors who do have pets?
Absolutely. Well, I think, again, that's one of our main priorities at Keystone Link is education. And Grace's point is a very valid one. I mean, that is real world stuff. We hear from folks all the time that they come right out and say, if you were not here, I would have never left. If we weren't able to take their pet, they would not have left. So it is unbelievably impactful to the victims within your community that you have some kind of service, number one, but even more importantly, what we really struggle with is making that service known. If women don't know about the service, it's such a barrier. So it's great that we have these services in our community, but it's a constant effort to make sure the victims know the service exists. So, our model is a little bit different than Grace's, but I would say we probably have the two most important, or not important, but the most common models for larger cities. Grace's model is that the animals stay with the victim in shelter, right? Our model in Harrisburg, and we serve Cumberland, Dauphin, and Perry County. So in this tri-county area, our model is that the shelter provides the safe haven program. So if you as a victim enter the one of the domestic violence shelters within those counties, those domestic violence shelters have our emergency contact. The pets will come to us. They are housed by us. We provide free veterinary care. We provide the food, all of the services that the animal would need during its time with us. So that's, kind of the second most and honestly, I have to say it's probably a little bit more common than Grace's. It's still a struggle to get actual bricks and mortar shelters to allow pets to come and stay with them. It's just a lot of education, but it's happening. We're working on it. However, I would never want smaller communities to feel like, well, if you don't have a domestic violence facility that allows pets, or you don't have, maybe some counties don't have an animal shelter. That's a reality. Communities can still go grassroots and work together to form a collaboration of caring individuals that are willing to foster these animals in their own home. Obviously there are legal considerations that would need to be considered there, but it can happen. It can work. It takes a little bit of time, a little bit of mentoring, and a little bit of organization, but it's worth it because you are helping the victims within your community. So the two takeaways in my mind would be, if your community has a program, working collaboratively and together across every social service, everything that you could think, whether it's your Rotary Club, your church, don't just think about victim services, because the victims aren't using the victim services because they don't know that they can. So you have to go where they are. They're at the grocery store, they're at the church, they're maybe participating in Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts, or they're at their kids' school. That's where we have to work as a community to educate and let people know. If your community does not have a resource, again, drop back to that grassroots. Every community has animal advocates. Every community has good people that could work together to be ready to foster these animals when it's needed. So don't ever discount or think you have to have this beautiful formal program. You really don't. You just need a compassionate, caring community, and there are lots of those throughout Pennsylvania.
Thank you for that, Amy. I do want to bring Dana in here from the legal side of things, but Grace, I want to give you a chance first. I know Amy mentioned that you kind of use a different model than they use, and I want to see if you wanted to kind of expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, the project that Dana supervises is our Emergency Pet Transitional Housing Assistance Program through the Department of Justice. And what our program is it has multiple components. So we do have housing units for victims and their companion animals, but we also work with area shelters and animal community providers to provide that housing as well. So it's a multifaceted model and approach that allows multiple options for victims based on their circumstances. We all know that housing right now is extremely difficult to find, and so we knew we wouldn't have enough housing units for everyone who needed them. So the second part of the project is to provide that emergency shelter for animals while we're looking for the housing. The program trains veterinary providers on the intersectionality of human and animal abuse. So it's brought in the veterinary community into our work. And then in addition to that, we do provide stipends for animals, because it's been my goal and our goal on the PAWS team to make the case for the battered pet, right? And we know that only 17%, to Amy's point, of domestic violence centers across the country have any capacity to serve animals whatsoever. So when you look at the fact that 70 to 90% of all families own a pet, 50% of all victims say they won't leave unless their pet can go with them, but only 17% of domestic violence centers have the capacity to help, then that's really a plea to the field that we should focus on this issue. It's an important issue and we can do better.
Thank you for that. All right, Dana, you have a great position as you are the PAWS for Empowerment Coordinator, as well as a legal advocate there for Crisis Center North. So whenever we're looking at Pennsylvania, what are we doing as a state, or I guess what could we do as a state when it comes to PFAs and protections for pets?
Yeah, and I'm so blessed and thankful to be able to work in this position. And it's a position that I have a lot of passion for, because I am a legal advocate as well as the PAWS for Empowerment Coordinator, which gives me an interesting view, which I love Amy's comment, the grants that we're under, and as well as what the Humane Rescue talks about, is that we really need to educate people on this link and also to help them provide services. So it's a two-part thing. And it's so interesting being in court, because when I go into court and I work in PFAs and I work in the criminal courts and I talk about this link, people are just like so surprised and so appreciative that we're there to talk about their pets. They do not understand the intimidation that they're getting, that is being caused through this pet. They don't recognize it as a form of abuse. And then when we talk about it, they see it extremely clearly. And so the PFA process is very important for advocates to understand this form of intimidation and power and control, because it really truly exists. And I see it in the court all the time. I see it all the time. It's very interesting how much it comes out when you mention it, when I bring it up, because people come in and they ask me, can I even get a PFA if I haven't been hit, if I haven't gone to the hospital? And abuse comes in many forms: financial, emotional. And this also is extremely important, because when you are the caretaker of your pet, you love that pet. It is a part of your family. And someone who wants to control you uses that pet to control you in all the ways that Grace and Amy have talked about. It's so important. And so the PFA process is an extremely important part. As we all know, as advocates, that is a way for people to seek safety. It's part of our safety planning. And so when they come in, unfortunately, Pennsylvania does not have a law that combines this PFA protection for people with pets. 37 other states in the United States do have laws about protection from abuse, which is the PFA. on ways that to recognize how important pets are to families, to people, and to this process of control that abusers are having. So in Pennsylvania, we don't have one. However, with our petitions for protection from abuse, we are able to include it in different ways. The first way is when people are describing abuse. You know, if you ask, do you have a pet? Has that pet been used to control you? Is it a barrier to you leaving, and how? So those facts can go into the petition to prove that there is abuse, there is intimidation, there is control, and the person is afraid. So a PFA is an emergency petition to protect people who are afraid, who are scared that things are going to escalate or this abuse is going to continue. So that is an important place to put it. The other states, unfortunately, or fortunately for them, unfortunately for us, do have other protections in place. Now, there is a bill right now that is in the legislature to modify protection from abuses, and it would do three things. One, it could possibly grant ownership to the victim of the pet. It can also say that the abuser is unable to stalk, harass, abuse the pet, the companion animal, just as much as that person is unable to do it to the actual victim who's applying, as well as the children. It's just another family member in the home that it recognizes. And so that's important. And it also can state in there that that person will not abuse the pet, and also stay away from the area or the home where the pet is living. Because as we've learned right now through this discussion, that a lot of times the animal is abused to hurt the person. And those states, which is interestingly, will say, if you've abused the pet in a way that to intimidate a person, you get a PFA. It reaches the level of an emotional abuse. It reaches a level of intimidation that is recognized as that fear. So only that threatening that if you leave, I will kill your pet. If you leave, that pet won't be here. Actually hurting the pet, telling the children that, you know, something is wrong with the pet, threatening that victim, like, I'm going to tell the children that you gave the pet away, or that you hurt the pet just for the children's sake. Those are forms of intimidation that are recognized. And this bill that's out there right now recognizes those factors. However, it is not passed in law in Pennsylvania. So as advocates, we have to work those into the petitions that exist at the moment.
I'm glad to hear that bill is out there, though, that's being worked on. Hopefully Pennsylvania can get up there. What you said, 37 other states, correct?
Yep. And Utah just passed one, so they're the 37th.
Hopefully Pennsylvania can be 38.
Dana texted me these things in the morning. I was like, Utah passed. Thank you, Dana.
Sticking with Pennsylvania here, whenever it comes when it comes to a legal separation or a divorce, what are the steps that a survivor is able to take to prove ownership of the pet, and what kind of rights are there for owners in these situations, Dana?
And that's such a difficult question for people, because when you are in a relationship or you're married, a lot of times you'll buy a pet together. So just as Grace stated, it is extremely important to have ownership, to actually, when you're working with your victims and they say, I want to leave. Okay, well, let's figure out how to make a paper trail to show and prove ownership of that animal. And those, of course, are things like, as they said, license, registrations, vet bills, or in your name, pictures of your pet, tattoos, all of those kind of things. And we do have laws in Pennsylvania about ownership of pets that will help with those certain aspects of it. First of all, as we know, which is another unfortunate thing in Pennsylvania law, is that pets are property. It is the same as a table. It is the same as a toaster. An animal is simply a piece of property, like a chair in your house. So if you separate, all that the law looks at in the divorce code is who owns that property, who bought that property. It doesn't matter at this time in the courts who fed that animal, who took that animal out, which the best place for that animal Is it a place where it's in a loving situation and someone's caring about it? Or is it with someone that has been abusive? They do not look at it. It is simply a toaster. That pet is a toaster. It's not a family member. And it's very clear in the law. There's a case where that happened and they said, we can't even judge. They tried to make an agreement on visitation with the pet. But then the court said there was a problem with the agreement, and the court said, I can't even look at this because when you get a property in a divorce, you will have a right to transfer it, to sell it, to do whatever you want with your toaster. So it's the same with the pet. If you are awarded the pet in a divorce, you can move out of state and that person can never see the pet again. You can do anything you want with that pet that is allowable under law. And even though there was an agreement to maybe change that, the court said, I can't even look at this because we're not going to do visitation on toasters. So it's not even a question. So there is another bill out in Pennsylvania, and it talks about giving pets sort of a spot that would be in between a child and property, never raising, of course, to a child. However, it would look at who takes care of the pet, who has been the one to take the pet to the vet, and it would support an agreement. It would allow to enforce an agreement with visitation for a pet. And when there's not an agreement, the court would be allowed to rule on certain best interests of the pet, which is not in existence now. Other states do have that, but unfortunately in Pennsylvania, there is only the divorce code, and it's whoever owns that property can do whatever they want. So that paper trail of ownership is extremely important to our victims.
Thanks so much for sharing that information, Dana. It's really helpful to hear kind of how companion animals are dealt with within the legal system and Pennsylvania statute. And hopefully Pennsylvania will make some progress on these bills that are out there now that add additional protections. So kind of shifting gears, the program at Crisis Center North, as we've discussed, is pretty unique and has made the news for its animal advocates. And I know we've talked a little bit about the sheltering component, but Grace, I'm wondering if you could share a little bit more about how this program started and just more about how it works and even the animals involved. And I know we were lucky to have two of them here with us today.
Sort of on screen. Yeah, absolutely. The program began in 2011 by accident, the way most wonderful things do. Penny in the background, clearly engaged in our Facebook conversation here, came in to work with me as a 2-year-old dog. And the way our center was structured, she was not like in a client area. And a little boy came running out of the center and said, Miss Grace, can I see your dog? Can I see your dog? And I knew that particular case, and he did not want to go to counseling. He would not speak to the counselor. He had been going to counseling for 6 months because his mom had been making him go, and he just would not talk about the circumstances in the home. And he was so happy when he saw Penny. And then I got an idea, and I probably shouldn't have, but I did. And then I said to him, well, you know what? I hear your mom and that counselor over there are plotting to get you into session, and I hear you don't really want to go. And he's like, I don't. And I said, okay, let's work together on this, right? And he's like, what do you have in mind? And I said, why don't we give your session to Penny? Like, she really could use it, but I don't have the time to take her. And if you took her to the session, you wouldn't have to do it. She would get to go. I would be helped out. Everybody wins. And he's like, you'll let me take your dog? And I said, yes. And so he took the dog into session and told everything. The dog, Penny, just collapsed on his lap. He didn't look at the counselor. He talked about everything that had happened in that case. And the counselor came back with a leash, gave me the dog, and said, do something with the dog. So that was my directive for them. I'm like, do what? And so I started researching. So our program began in 2011 with one dog, Penny, and she began as a canine therapeutic support service to our advocates. But more and more people wanted the contact with the animals. So we trained Penny to go to court. And we were very fortunate that Judge Sevegas allowed his courtroom to be the experimental incubator. And Penny then became the first shelter dog that we know in the state of Pennsylvania that was an animal advocate and particularly working in court. And then the cases grew there, and we realized everybody everywhere basically needed or wanted a dog. So we added Ari next. Ari's a 6-year-old. I like to call him a Chowbador retriever. He's part Chow, part Labrador. We do rescue these animals from shelters, and that is a commitment because shelter animals come with their own set of challenges. And it takes over 2 years to train these dogs to be able to work in therapeutic and courtroom settings. Rune, baby Rune, is very special to us because Rune, like all parents, right? The youngest, you start experimenting, right? So baby Rune went to court at 12 weeks old, again, in Judge Zevegas's court. That's unheard of nationally that you'd be allowed to take a puppy inside of court. But we sold Judge Zevegas on the fact that we had a theory that we could do it, and that if Rune only knew court her whole life long, she would be the supreme of all the dogs. And she really does know her job. She knows nothing but being in court because Rune has literally grown up in court. And then we had Thea for a period of time. Thea was with us for a few years. She was a rescued Sphinx cat. She was featured in People magazine. I told the dogs, don't let that bother you. Cats are always showy. That's just how it is, you know? And Thea led people, was trained. Those cats function a lot like dogs do. And, you know, I don't have all the training talents that my team does. I have my specialty, they have theirs. But Thea literally helped people across Pittsburgh meditate during the pandemic on command. And the video that we made of Thea meditating went viral. And all of a sudden we were receiving requests from Mexico and England and China. And then she was featured in People magazine for her ability to do that. She's moved on now to other places, but we did appreciate the time that we had her. So we started there and we grew. And then in this past year, we were really pleased to say, okay, what can we do for survivors, right? So, you know, we're working with the people who come into the center, but what can we do for survivors and their pets? And that our program has grown out now to include the training to veterinarians, the animal stipends, and the housing. So I think once you start a project like this, you really get invested in it, and you see that there's more and more that you could do.
Great, thank you for sharing. And we will be sure, I know Rune wasn't able to join us today, so we do have a photo of all three of them that we will share on Facebook so that everyone can take a little break this afternoon and look at their cute faces and have a little lift to their afternoon spirit. So Dana, did you want to add anything about your specific role as the Pause for Empowerment coordinator?
I am really impressed. Basically, I'm so impressed with the center. I'm impressed how our organization has worked together with this grant. I'm very impressed that the Department of Justice has recognized this as something that's important for our victims, and it is so important to them. When you have an animal, it's great because I work in direct service too, along with administration of the grant, and working with the people who get to keep their animals is amazing. We just, as Amy had said, we've had clients who said, I'm not going into rehab unless I make sure my dog's okay. Unless my dog is a place to stay, I'm going to sleep on the streets with my dog. And the program has been amazing by allowing us to have them, you know, be housed together or even keeping them apart for a short time with visitation and knowing that they're going to be reunited and are in a safe place. It's been an amazing journey, and I hope to continue it and continue helping these people and really working to educate. And just as Amy said, we are working to educate all kinds of areas, not just the court, not just other advocates. We work to help everybody understand this because people can recognize this in their line of work and help the animals and help the people. And so it doesn't matter if you're a hotel, you're a pet store, you are at a grocery store, like you can help by having that information. You can say, hey, that you can be helped. There are people who care, and that's what they do. So I'm very happy about being able to be part of that and thankful.
Thank you for sharing. You both mentioned working directly with survivors, and Grace, you shared that really touching story about the boy in the therapy session with Penny. Do either of you have any kind of feedback, testimonials that you have heard from survivors that have participated in this program and have interacted with the animals?
We do. I think Dana and I both have one to share with you today. I know mine, one of mine just occurred the other day. Ari was off duty. So when they're off duty, dogs absorb stress differently than humans. So we have all kinds of rules for their breaks and kind of things. And Ari was on his break, hanging out in my office, and the child counselor came back and said, I need the dog. And I was like, all right, you're not trained as a handler yet. I have to go with you. You know, how can I help? And she said, I have a client. And we made a breakthrough in the last session, and it's really coming through. And today this client is in a beanbag holding a bear with a weighted blanket on him and cannot move, is not acknowledging when I speak to him, is just like sobbing into tears. And I said, okay, well, Ari and I will go. So I went and said to the client, utilizing the client's name, you know, hey, you know, how are things going? And couldn't get any acknowledgement. And then I said, hey, I have my dog, but if you don't answer me, I've got to go back, right? So if you're interested in seeing Ari for a little bit today, how about you sit up in the chair and talk to me? And right up, like jumped right up, smile over the face, bear thrown aside, weighted blanket gone, wiping tears off the face, slid down the beanbag on the floor, and the dog is right there, you know, licking illegally, I might add, because Ari's not allowed to do that, the tears off the boy's face. And then interestingly enough, Ari got up and took him across the room to the appropriate room for children's counseling and walked him into the room. And the counselor just smiled at me and shut the door. And I just was like, this is our sign for text me if you have an issue, you know, I'm right in my office, I'll come. And then Ari completed the session. So it was a great testament, that circumstance, to show how, you know, the dogs can really remove the barriers to healing, right? Quickly and much faster than we can as humans. I think Dana's seen different things in court.
Yeah, so in court, they are amazing. I mean, they walk in and it changes the entire atmosphere of the court, first of all. And then I know that Rune, who is unfortunately unable to come, she has been a great help in court. She had a very difficult case. There was a transgender man who had to testify about physical abuse and sexual abuse on 2 different occasions in 2 different cases in that same courtroom, and was extremely nervous. And of course, the issues are very, very sensitive, and he was reluctant to talk about the details which are necessary for the case to go forward. Rune sat with him for 2 hours, and he petted Rune and talked to our advocate, Sherry, who works with Rune, about everything that was going to happen, and you know, the services that we have and what was going to happen in court and questions that were going to ask. Rune went into the courtroom with him, sat with him to talk about these issues and what happened in the details, which were very difficult for him to talk about. And then after his testimony and they left the courtroom, Rune stayed with him and helped de-escalate any of the issues that were going on at that time, even though that he did not have to testify any longer. It was so emotional that he really needed that dog with him. And he told our advocate, he said, I could not have testified without Rune. Just really helping him at the beginning of it, getting through it, and then afterwards. So the dogs are amazing. Even if it's not your dog, just having them in court change the atmosphere and give the people, the victims, the support that they need and the confidence they need to get up and tell their stories.
They really do. When you work with them, they start to develop their own job descriptions. And I don't know whether to be annoyed by that or not. They pick, like, we'll say, oh, Ari is going to do this job. And then he tells you he likes another job better, and so they all kind of shift and slide around. They're cross-trained on everything. But what's really interesting is when they start developing their own job descriptions that you didn't train them for. And that's what makes them different than volunteer therapy dogs. And I'm not in any way dissing that. I've done that work with Penny. She's a certified TDI dog, and we've done hospice work together and that type of work. But the difference between that, having a volunteer come in with a therapy dog and having a working dog on staff is another huge issue I think people should look at, because once the dog has set partners, ongoing training, just like any human would have, right? Exposure to the same courtrooms and a repetition in the job and with the client, they're seeing a client more than a one-touch contact, right? And I think that's when you can see the greatest advantage there. I know Penny still to this day can diagnose anxiety versus depression with 100% accuracy. And she has a cue where she tells people what that is consistently every single time. And when you can get a dog to the point that they're cueing you and talking to you, you've got the same kind of relationship as, say, a police officer would have with their partner police dog, right? And that's what you want. You want them talking to you and giving you a signal, the same signal every time. For Penny, anxiety is 6 feet apart, looking straight at a victim's eyes. Depression is, I'm going to put my head on your lap, or I'm going to lay over your feet. It's consistent across all times. And when we've done inventories, it has been proven to be, correct each time, which isn't surprising because they have such incredibly powerful noses, right? They can do some things with their noses that we can't do that maximizes the partnership between the human and the animal. So I really encourage people to have dogs on staff. I know it's a unique model, and I know everyone is looking to add this, and it seems easy to have volunteers come and do that kind of piece, but it is a different dynamic when the dog is in the center with the same people, the same handler for 20 or more hours a week.
Thank you so much for sharing these stories. It sounds like such an empowering program that is really making a difference for people. And I do feel like we talked a lot about Rune, so I'm going to try to share my screen really briefly just to show a photo of all of them so everyone can get to see Rune. And then I have one last question about the animals while I do that. So here are the Ari, Penny, and Rune. Want to make sure Rune gets her
she appreciates that, Julie.
And like I said, we'll make sure that we share this on Facebook too, but here's all three of them. So Grace, you mentioned that you briefly had Thea the cat as well. Yes. Is the program predominantly dogs, or are there other animals that are participating?
Right now it's dogs, but I'm open to anything, right? So I keep flirting with a therapy cow, and my husband's like, no, you've gone too far. And I'm like, I think I could do it, right? So, I mean, there are a lot of animals that have the propensity to do this kind of work, right? And I think it just depends on what kind of work you want them to do and what setup you have. So I don't know, Julie, you might have to stay tuned. I found her, she's in Ireland, she's all white. I'm going to name her Bella. I haven't secured her as of yet. Not sure how all that works out. Haven't told the board though. So
well, Grace, you don't need to go to Ireland. I actually have a cow, so we'll talk. I'm not joking. I
love you, Amy.
He's fabulous. I love him, and he could totally do therapy. I've raised him since he was 5 months. We'll sidebar.
Oh my God.
Wonderful.
Awesome.
Wonderful.
Yeah. I mean, I think you can work with a lot of different animals. And as you can see, your local humane folks are more than willing to help you out. But I think they deserve a second chance. That's why I wanted to train them. You know what I mean? That they deserve a second chance, and it is a big commitment, but it's rewarding. So for 2 years, you have to carry a puppy underneath your arms to the grocery store and the pharmacy and everywhere you go. But it's fun. And we're getting ready to perhaps add on a new one, which means we've got to get, some kind of, what do you call those? You put the babies in playpens, a playpen, and then we move the dogs around the office and we're like, touch its ears, touch its tail, touch its paws. A lot of the socialization processes that you do, but people then start on staff fighting over who gets to have the dog, right? It's like, I have a grant due. No, I have this deadline due. I get the dog, right? So it does have the unintended benefit of helping out your staff to de-stress as well if you do it. So I do hope other programs will be able to work it in, even in some small way.
Great.
As we start to wrap up here, especially since it looks like Grace and Amy have another meeting to add to their calendar about the cow.
Can't wait.
I want to circle back around to the link a little bit, Amy. For people who want to learn more information or people who want to get involved, what do you recommend them check out?
So our website is the keystonelink.org. Admittedly, very limited. We don't have a ton up there. Right now, we have the folks that are kind of leading the charge on the coalition. We also, when we do have trainings, or we do have opportunities for CEs, or we are doing speaking engagements, we also put that up on the website. But we link, no pun intended, to the National Link Coalition, which is a much more cumbersome website with a lot of content, and they do produce an e-newsletter. We don't, because it seems so duplicative. They do a phenomenal job of highlighting training opportunities, advocacy opportunities, legislation that's happening. They're very good at itemizing different types of studies centered around the link. So if you're at all interested, sign up for their newsletter. It's free, and it's a really nice way to kind of dip your toe in the water. So looking at both of those websites, again, joining in on the conversation, taking the trainings, but also, as I think we've all touched on, how do you get involved in the link? It's the grassroots advocacy. Anybody can do it, no matter what your job is or your title is or your role is in the community, you can do it. So that's another way you can get involved.
Yeah, just to add, I've been in the movement for 23 years, and I have to say I really enjoy this coalition a lot because it's a multidisciplinary approach. So it's intellectually fascinating to go talk to people instead of talking to people who are in the same, area that you are. And it just provides really interesting possibilities, I think, for all of us as to how we can work together to remove barriers. And it's really kind of interconnected. Communities are interconnected, they're not siloed. And so our work should be interconnected as well.
Thank you. And before we close out here, I just wanted to open the floor for you, Grace, Amy, Dana, if there's anything that you wanted to say, any last remarks before we sign off here.
Ari just indicated that you can send bones for his appearance today to Crisis Center North. He just wanted to get that in. Penny, on the other hand, has no further comments.
Noted, Ari, noted.
We'll send an extra one for Penny there too. So.
All right.
Well, all right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We really appreciate Dana, Grace, Amy, Ari, and Penny, and Rune. We know Rune wasn't able to make it today, but she's still here with us. So we want to thank everybody for joining us for this great conversation, and thank you all for joining us on Facebook. And we will see you for our next session. Thank you all.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.